Welcome to the Deep Dive. So glad you could join us. You know how it works here. You bring the sources, the articles, the research, even your own notes, and we dive deep. We pull out the core insights, the really important stuff, basically giving you that shortcut to being genuinely informed without drowning in all the information out there. Today, we're getting into something truly fascinating and I think really vital. It's about neurodiversity. Specifically, we're digging into excerpts from a text called The Divergent Worldview of ADHD and ASD. So neurodiversity, right? The basic idea is that differences in how brains work are just natural human variations, like biodiversity, but for brains, not deficits. And today we're focusing on ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and ASD, autism spectrum disorder. Our mission really is to unpack how common traits, things we all recognize, get seen so differently depending on who's showing them. We want to explore how these labels, these perceptions really shape life for people with ADHD and ASD. It might challenge some assumptions.
Absolutely. That's the core mission. We're aiming to go beyond just, the simple descriptions. We want to look at the nuances, the subtleties, and how these things are perceived, and really dissect the language people use, because that language carries weight. It carries implications for society, for how we label people. It's not just about what the source says, but digging into why it matters for how we all understand each other and, well, interact with the world, especially with people who might process things a bit differently. It's about finding deeper empathy, maybe richer insight, and possibly even questioning our own hidden biases, I know. The communication paradox, when conclusion first goes sideways.
Okay, so let's kick things off with communication. Something we probably all kind of agree on, right? Especially at work or just trying to be efficient. Think about all that advice. Get to the point. Conclusion first. Be brief. Be clear. Stick to the facts, the numbers. Most people would nod along. Yeah, sounds like solid gold advice. Concise, direct, easy to understand. The ideal way to communicate effectively.
Exactly. And this is where the source brings up this really interesting paradox. It's quite poignant, actually. The text says, look, people with ADHD and ASD, they read this advice, they hear it, they completely agree with it conceptually. They think, yep, makes total sense, that's logical, that's how I should do it. There's no argument with the principle. But then the source points out that even when they know this, even when they've got that conclusion ready right before they speak, in that critical moment, they often end up doing the exact opposite. And it's not because they didn't understand. It's a difference in how things come out under pressure.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that because the experience described sounds intense. Imagine you're in a big meeting, maybe a job interview, or just a really important chat. You're prepped. You have that crisp conclusion first answer ready to go. You know exactly what you want to say. Point A, boom. But then the question hits, and instead of just giving point A, you find yourself starting with the background, the origin story, the context, maybe some related detail that just popped into your head. It's like your brain under pressure just sort of overflows with all the connections and feels the need to lay it all out chronologically instead of just jumping to the end point. And the result? Well, the conversation stretches out. What you meant to be short and sharp becomes this like winding explanation. And that main point, the one you had perfectly crafted, it gets buried somewhere in the middle, maybe even lost altogether. Your intention was crystal clear communication, but the output feels, well, not that. It's not about not being smart or not getting the idea of good communication. It's something about how the information is processed and delivered right then and there, almost involuntary, prioritizing the full picture over just the headline. The source says something like it should end concisely, but instead they end up talking about the middle part and the point becoming unclear.
That really does highlight a critical point, especially when you think about the cognitive side of things. It's not a lack of understanding the what of effective communication. It's often tied to differences in executive functions. Things like working memory, how you organize thoughts, inhibiting responses maybe. For lots of people with ADHD or ASD, the way they retrieve information might be more associative. Branching, rather than strictly linear. So instead of a straight line to the answer, their brain might be lighting up all the related bits, wanting to give the full context so there's no misunderstanding. To a linear thinker, it feels like a detour. But to the speaker, it might feel essential for building a complete, accurate picture. And think about the internal feeling, that mismatch between what you intended to say and what actually came out. That can be incredibly frustrating, demoralizing even. You know you should be brief, but the words just flow differently, often driven by a really genuine desire to be understood fully and correctly. And on the listener's side, also frustrating. They might see the speaker as disorganized, maybe rambling, maybe even avoiding the question, when the real intention was thoroughness. This kind of communication difference can cause real problems, especially professionally. Interviews, reviews, team updates. What's meant as detailed context can easily be seen as inefficient, unfocused, maybe even lacking confidence. It creates this subtle, persistent barrier. It can lead to this perception that the person isn't quite as sharp or capable as they are, just because their style isn't the standard conclusion-first approach. It really sets the stage for misunderstanding, doesn't it? Where good intentions get misinterpreted as flaws. 2. Action and impulsivity, the fine line between initiative and recklessness.
That communication example really does set the stage perfectly for this next point, because it's another case of internal experience versus external perception being worlds apart. Let's talk about action, impulsivity, something that can feel like this incredible, powerful drive from the inside. But society can so easily spin it as negative, like having a superpower that gets labeled a weakness just because of who has it.
Precisely. And the source makes a really sharp observation here. It says when impulsivity is in the driving seat, action tends to happen before thinking, or at least before extensive thinking. It's like a direct leap. Idea straight to action. Now, from the person's own perspective, this can feel like immense action power, as the source puts it. A real ability to just start, to get things done without getting stuck in analysis paralysis. It's a spontaneous energy, often fueled by noticing something new or just a very rapid connection between thought and doing. But then the source notes, society, or maybe just the conventional way we judge things, often slaps the label reckless on that exact same behavior. There's a quote in the source that just nails this. Action power in our hands quickly transforms into the dimension of recklessness. It's not about trying to be reckless. It's about how that natural tendency for quick action gets filtered through a different judgmental lens. Internally, it feels like a strength, engaging with the world, seizing moments, solving problems on the fly. But the moment it shows up externally, bam, it gets this label that basically negates the positive impulse behind it. Reduces it to a character flaw, not a capability.
And this is where it gets really interesting, you're right. Because that societal judgment is so, well, inconsistent and maybe unfair. Think about it. Acting quickly, making a fast decision, jumping on a task without overthinking. Sometimes that's celebrated, right? We call it initiative. You see it praised in entrepreneurs, maybe leaders. Wow, what a go-getter, takes charge, makes things happen. But if that exact same quick action comes from someone with ADHD or ASD, or it's viewed through that neurodivergent lens, suddenly it's reckless, thoughtless, impulsive in a bad way, didn't think it through. The action itself hasn't changed, but the value judgment totally flips, depending on who's doing it or why we think they're doing it. And imagine the impact, the emotional toll on someone whose actions are constantly getting that negative label. You have this internal drive, this energy, this way of solving problems quickly, and you see it as a strength. You're the one who gets things rolling. But time after time, that quality is met with criticism. Reckless, impulsive. It's not just annoying. It could lead to massive frustration, serious self-doubt, feeling like whatever you do, it's always going to be seen negatively.
Yeah, it's a constant invalidation.
Right. And this bias can totally warp how you see yourself, your own abilities. It feels deeply unfair. And maybe it even makes you hesitate to act next time, which ironically could then be seen as lacking initiative. It's a cycle.
It is. It can really hold people back in their career socially, too. And this pushes us to ask why. Why does the label change so drastically? Is it really about the outcome of the action? Or is it more about the perceived intent? Or maybe just the origin, the fact that we associate the action with a neurodivergent trait? The source strongly suggests it's often the origin, the association, something that could be neutral or even a real advantage in some situations like speed, decisiveness. Iterating quickly gets framed as a fundamental flaw just because of who is doing it. Think about it in a crisis or a fast-moving market. Acting quickly without getting bogged down can be incredibly valuable. It's how innovation happens sometimes, how opportunities are seized. But if that quick action is linked to ADHD-related impulsivity, suddenly it's seen as a liability, a lack of control, not an asset. This is where that deficit model thinking clashes with the neurodiversity idea, which sees these as just variations, some with potential strengths. This deep bias in labeling means a trait that could be a power gets rebranded, twisted into recklessness.
It's a really pertinent example of how external judgments can completely misrepresent an internal reality in a behavioral style. It makes you ask, are we judging the action itself or the person behind it?
3. The rebranding of resilience, fickleness versus flexible agility.
Yeah, that idea of rebranding traits based on who exhibits them is powerful, and it leads us right into adaptability, resilience, agility, pivoting. Everyone talks about how crucial these are today, especially professionally. You got to be flexible. But as our source shows, what happens when that exact quality shows up in someone neurodivergent? Surprise, surprise, the labels shift again, dramatically.
The source uses this fantastic corporate project example. It perfectly illustrates the double standard. So imagine a team is working hard on a project. Maybe they're pretty far along. Then, boom, strategy changes. The whole direction needs to shift. Uplink happens all the time, right? So the team needs to quickly pull back, cut their losses on the old plan, and pivot fast to a completely new approach. That takes real flexibility, quick thinking, letting go of sunk costs emotionally too, and just mentally switching gears without getting stuck on what was. It's a specific kind of resilience, cognitive flexibility. Okay, now here's the contrast the source highlights. An individual with ADHD in that exact situation, they can often surprisingly quickly move in another direction. They might not be as weighed down by the past effort. They can detach, let go of that emotional investment, and re-engage with the new plan with remarkable speed. It's this agility, maybe a natural tendency to shift focus when needed. But then the source contrasts this. What if a corporate overachiever, someone seen as typically successful, makes that same swift pivot? Oh, then it's praise to the skies, right? Using all those fancy borrowed terms, high resilience, strategic nimbleness, visionary adaptability, they're a star. But for the individual with ADHD, described as at my level in the source, that exact same agile, resilient response, it often gets dismissed casually, maybe even with a slightly negative spin. Oh, you just get bored easily, or simply labeled fickleness.
So what does this mean? I mean, this section just hammers home the incredible, almost absurd power of language and perception. It points out this massive contradiction. The action itself is identical. The person with ADHD isn't behaving differently than the overachiever in how they respond to the change. Both are pivoting quickly, letting go, moving on. But the label applied and all the value judgment, the social weight that comes with it flips completely just based on who's doing it and maybe the assumptions we already have about them. The source really captures the frustration asking that question. I know I'm off, but why does the phrasing change so much?
Yeah.
That question just resonates, right? It speaks to that feeling of deep unfairness, constant invalidation, the core trait, the ability to pivot, adapt quickly, not dwell that hasn't changed.
The essence is the same.
Exactly. But the description morphs from a top-tier desirable skill, resilience, into a character flaw, fickleness, can't stick with things. It's like deliberately rebranding a strength to make it look like a weakness.
Yeah.
And that's not just about words. It hits self-esteem, opportunities. It's genuinely disheartening.
What's just so fascinating here is the power of that framing. It really makes you question. How do we decide which traits are good and which are bad? Is it objective, based on results? Or is it totally subjective, colored by our preconceived notions about the person, maybe their diagnosis, their difference? The source even suggests alternative labels, right? Things like high instantaneous power or dynamic responsiveness or having the inner strength to bounce back quickly. Those could be just as accurate, maybe more accurate descriptions of that agility, but you rarely hear them applied in this context. No, the negative labels stick. They maintain this narrative of deficit, even when there's clear capability. And this encourages you listening, to think, how many other negative labels do we use that could actually be reframed? What if easily distracted is actually highly observant of the environment? What if daydreaming is deep imaginative processing? What if impulsive is decisive under pressure? This example from the source is just so powerful because it shows the problem often isn't the trait itself. It's the lens we use, the societal box we try to fit it into. It really pushes us to question our own biases, the standard wisdom, and the words we use, especially for people whose brains might work a bit differently than the supposed norm. It's about shifting from assuming there's one right way to be towards appreciating the diversity, everyday misinterpretations, forgetfulness and lateness, through a different lens.
Those bigger examples are really clear. But it's not just in, big corporate projects or high-stakes moments. These kinds of misinterpretations, this labeling mismatch, happens in everyday life, too, all the time. And those smaller daily interactions can really add up, leading to frustration and that feeling of being constantly invalidated. It's where the constant drip, drip, drip of negativity really hits home.
Oh, absolutely. The source gives a couple of excellent, very relatable examples of this pattern playing out daily. Let's start with forgetfulness. We've all forgotten things. The text describes hearing that comment, "You're forgetful," when something slips your mind. Seems straightforward. But the key detail the source points out is the person's response to forgetting. They don't just sigh and give up. No, their immediate reaction is to buy a replacement on the spot. They manage the situation. They're not passive. They're actively problem solving right then and there. So it's not just about the initial memory blip. It's about the quick, flexible thinking that follows immediately.
That really does raise a question, doesn't it? If someone forgets something, maybe it's attention, maybe working memory, but then instantly, resourcefully, fixes the problem by getting a replacement. Couldn't that be seen differently? Not just as forgetful, but maybe demonstrating quick-wittedness or really resourceful, practical problem solving. The source even explicitly says the person wishes people would say they're quick-witted. That desire for the action to be recognized, not just the initial lapse, says so much about the frustration.
It really does.
It's like focusing only on the moment the driver hits a pothole instead of acknowledging they immediately steered out of it and kept going. The focus stays stuck on the negative.
Precisely. And then there's the whole issue of lateness or punctuality, another huge friction point, socially and professionally, for many neurodivergent people. The source talks about getting those sarcastic remarks, the eye rolls, for being late. It's common, unfortunately, and often leads to shame, anxiety. But here's the really telling part. The person actively tries so hard to compensate, often putting in immense effort, like aiming to arrive an hour early, standing around waiting just to be absolutely sure they're not late, maybe because of time blindness or just intense anxiety about messing up again. But even this huge effort, this attempt to overcorrect and meet the expectation, gets met with negativity. The source gives these specific kind of painful examples, like hearing, "Oh, you still can't remember the time, LOL," just dismissive, right? Totally ignores the struggle and the effort. Or, even more bizarrely, being told something like, "Could you wait somewhere else until the last minute? Because if you arrive on time, it makes me look like I was late." Astonishing, isn't it? The effort to be early, which you'd think would be seen as conscientious, maybe even admirable, it's not just ignored, it's actively penalized. Because it disrupts someone else's comfort zone or their own perception of timing, or maybe just how they think arrival should look. So no credit for being early. Instead, it's another criticism, another way you're told you're off, wrong, inconvenient, even when you're bending over backwards to fit in.
And if we connect that back to the bigger picture, these everyday moments, they really highlight this deeper pattern, don't they? A pattern of invalidation, a fundamental lack of seeing the whole picture. It's not really about the forgotten keys or being 5 minutes late. It's this tendency to filter everything related to that person through a pre-existing negative lens.
Yeah, the known trait overrides everything else.
Right. They're known for being forgetful or late, maybe because of a diagnosis or just past observations. So any action in that area automatically gets interpreted negatively. It's like a confirmation bias loop.
And the cumulative effect on the individual is just immense frustration. All that genuine effort to adapt, manage, problem solve, just navigate a world that often isn't set up for how their brain works, it goes unseen. Or worse, it gets punished or mocked. It feels like the world is constantly looking for proof that they're off, instead of recognizing strengths or acknowledging the sheer effort involved. These little digs, these daily misunderstandings, they build up. They reinforce that feeling that no matter what you do, how hard you try, you'll always be seen as fundamentally wrong or different. And that can really damage self-esteem, impact mental health, and even make people reluctant to keep trying when their efforts are constantly dismissed. It creates this profound sense of otherness. It can lead to masking, withdrawal. It's heavy stuff. V, the fundamental question, are we truly off?
And bringing all these threads together, the communication paradox, that action recklessness line, resilience becoming fickleness, those daily misunderstandings about forgetting or being late, it all culminates in that incredibly powerful, really quite moving question posed right at the end of the source material: are we truly off? After exploring all these perception gaps, that question just hangs in the air, doesn't it?
It really does. It synthesizes everything we've talked about. And this is where that neurodiversity perspective feels so important. What the source seems to be powerfully suggesting is that fundamentally the essence hasn't changed. The traits themselves, the way information is processed leading to background-first communication, the quickness to action, the rapid adaptability, the memory lapse followed by immediate problem solving, the challenges with standard timekeeping despite huge effort. These are inherent. They're part of how that individual's mind works, how they engage with the world. It's not the traits that make them off. It's the labeling. It's the interpretation by others, usually filtered through neurotypical expectations and societal norms, that creates that feeling, that judgment of being divergent or off. It frames it as an external judgment imposed upon them, not an inherent internal failing. The source makes such a strong case that these things we habitually label as weaknesses, fickleness, forgetfulness, recklessness, could and maybe should be seen as strengths. Just shift the frame slightly. Fickleness becomes agility, flexibility, that high instantaneous power to adapt.
Forgetfulness, when you include the immediate resourceful fix, becomes quick-wittedness, dynamic problem-solving. And recklessness, viewed differently, is that decisive action power, the ability to initiate and execute quickly when others might hesitate. The underlying behavior is the same, but the meaning, the value assigned to it, changes completely depending on the words we choose and the perspective we take. The fundamental challenge to that deficit narrative.
And that, hopefully, is the real aha moment for you listening. It's less about individuals with ADHD or ASD having flaws that need fixing so they can fit one rigid definition of normal. It's much more about questioning the external judgments, the societal frameworks that we often apply without even thinking. It's realizing that maybe the problem isn't the person's wiring, but the inflexibility of our expectations, the poverty of our language for describing human variation, and maybe our collective discomfort with genuine diversity in how people think and act. It forces us to ask, who gets to define normal anyway, and what biases are baked into the words we use every day?
Which leads us right to that critical thinking point, doesn't it? How do our own biases, our cultural conditioning, our assumptions about how things should be done color how we see others? Especially those whose minds might work differently. Are we unintentionally squashing valuable traits? Missing unique forms of intelligence or creativity simply because they don't fit our neat little boxes of good or efficient? The call here is really to understand the why behind behavior, the intent, the mechanism, before jumping to a label, especially a negative one. It's about moving from that instant judgment to genuine curiosity, from labeling to really trying to understand, and ultimately valuing the whole incredible range of human ways of being.
Wow, what a deep dive that was. We covered so much ground today. From that communication paradox conclusion first intentions going sideways to the action impulsivity tightrope between initiative and recklessness. We saw how resilience gets rebranded as fickleness and felt the sting of those everyday misinterpretations around things like forgetfulness and lateness. Every step showed how the same core trait can look completely different depending on the lens, often leaving the individual feeling fundamentally off.
And the big takeaway, the really critical point from this exploration, seems to be just how profoundly our understanding is shaped by the words we use, the labels we apply. Real insight, genuine empathy, it seems to come from looking past those surface judgments. Getting to the underlying nature of a trait, its purpose, its potential, rather than just accepting the standard, often negative description. It's recognizing that offness might be more about social perception than any inherent flaw.
So what does this mean for you, listening right now? Well, maybe it's an invitation to reflect. Think about your own interactions, the assumptions you make, the language you reach for. How do you describe behaviors in others or even yourself? Could adopting a more empathetic, more nuanced view, one that questions labels and seeks the why, lead to deeper connections, not just around neurodiversity, but across the board in understanding human behavior?
And maybe a final thought to carry with you, something provocative to chew on until our next deep dive. How many other qualities in ourselves and the people around us do we unknowingly diminish or misunderstand just because we haven't stopped to question the labels we've always used? What could we all gain individually, societally, by searching for a richer, more accurate, maybe more generous vocabulary to describe the incredible, complex spectrum of human experience?